All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Millennials Are Old podcast. And you know what, Brian? I've been thinking, right? Of course, we've been reviewing a lot of very high grossing, very high budget things recently, like, of course, African American Psycho and the like. But you know what, Brian? I think we should talk about something maybe a little bit more low key, something maybe more up and coming. You might even say has gone recently viral on the internet. Would you be interested in reviewing something like that, Brian?
Well, I love virality. I love things that are mimetic. I love nostalgia. So I love ringtones. So if any of those things can correlate to this week's subject, I have a feeling I will be just right on board.
Fuck yeah, absolutely. And the reason I'm talking about wanting to review something a little bit more independent, if you will, was because a couple weeks ago, I saw an Instagram post from a band called Cheem, who played what I can only refer to as nu metal, emo, pop punk, rap rock, progressive music. And I said to myself, what the fuck is this band? And I found out they were coming to where I live on a tour. And I'm like, I have to see what the fuck these guys are like. And you know what, Brian? They're genuinely probably my favorite independent band I've heard in about a year, I would say.
I had not heard of this band until you brought them to my attention. This is, in a lot of ways, very tailor-coded. In some ways, it's not necessarily a thing that you'd expect for you, but in a lot of ways, this is very tailor-friendly.
It is 100%. And they've come out with two recent EPs, Fast and Faster Fashion, which we're going to be reviewing this week. So, without further ado, let's get into our review of both these EPs. But before we get into our review this week, Brian, let's bring back our segment, Cringe Generational, Cringe Millennial Moment of the
Cringe
Week.
Generational Moment. Week.
Woo! Yeah! All right. And, Brian, this is a cringe generational segment, not really because of what they did was cringe. It's actually extremely based. But unfortunately, it's very cringe along the generation of people who run this planet, who are crusty 80-year-old Zionist shitbags.
You might even say kind of sickening, actually. Kind of a little disturbing.
Yes, exactly. The most prominent worldwide Zionist, lost an election 5 months ago, if you will, Joe Biden. And of course, now he just got diagnosed with prostate cancer that somebody on TV said that he had almost certainly had it even before he was elected president the first time.
Absolutely. Completely plausible that the Democratic Party knew about this or had inklings of it. It's weird.
It's weird. It's the stage of a dying empire. AOC, who I'm not a big fan of, but she is definitely a millennial, was essentially bullied out of possibly getting a seat, or I should say not even considered, for a man who was literally dying of terminal cancer and who was on that committee for 3 months before he died. Like, that is how diseased the Democratic Party is, that they can't even move a modicum closer to having just somebody who's alive lead the party.
But he did such good things in that 3 month span. I think we can all agree. We all see the fruits of his labor over those 3 months that he was on the committee. It's paying off gangbusters. And, he did his part. That's why I'm saying thank you, Joe.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Jerry Connolly, I think his name was. But nonetheless, well, speaking of Connolly, actually, a very Irish thing. So the cringe generational segment I wanted to actually talk about this week is a member of Kneecap getting a terrorism charge in the UK because he allegedly flew a Hezbollah flag during a performance. Now, here's the thing, Brian. America's got a lot of problems, right? And I think we can both agree. Actually, never mind. America's perfect. We're America first. We believe in MAGA, obviously. That's very much the brand for this show. Our name definitely isn't a play on our favorite left-wing, philosopher and revolutionary leader. Not at all.
Millennials are trying to think about makeup. Yeah, no, we love it.
Millennials are great already.
Millennials are great already. That's so fucking good.
But nonetheless, so I can't remember which one it was. It was, I think, Liam. Okay, Liam of the band Kneecap was charged with a terrorism charge in the UK. Now, the tangent I was going out about America is that even though America is deeply flawed, we do at least have some semblance of free speech, which the UK does not. Free speech in the UK is extremely tenuous at best. In fact, you could literally go to jail for making arguably racist Facebook posts. Like, the UK has some really shitty fucking free speech law, or I should say speech laws in general.
It's also just like, Kneecap have previously, disavowed Hezbollah. They're on record as not, loving Hezbollah,
Yeah, exactly. They are an Irish language, obviously left-wing, Sinn Féin-aligned band. Of course, they obviously have sympathies with, Palestinians and other, indigenous rights struggles throughout the world. But, they're still left-wing at the end of the day. If any left-wing Irish person actually supports Hezbollah, it is critical support at best.
It's such a well-trodden thing. And I know there are people who hate this, and it's kind of played out. That's not really what they're doing in this instance. But, showing, in a subversive way, showing, authoritarian symbols styles or whatever that go counter to like the culture that you're within. It's a pretty well trodden tradition in like both hip hop and punk rock.
No, exactly, 100%. And like honestly, if you're gonna rep any flag that's mildly problematic, I would say Hezbollah is one of the least problematic ones. Definitely less bad than the Israeli flag.
Well, you know who used to do that is fucking War Crime. Brace Belden's hardcore band used to play with a fucking big Israeli flag behind them.
Well, to be fair, he also flew a Nazi flag, so you know what? At least it was on brand. I'll just say that.
Yeah, no. Brace was the fucking king. Best hardcore band of there. But the kneecap stuff is kind of insane because it also seems like this is coming off the heels of Sharon Osbourne, John Lydon, a bunch of other old fucking dying reactionaries saying that kneecap, in John Lydon's words, need to be kneecapped. I think that Sharon Osbourne said they should be deported. Deported to where? I'm not sure. So it kind of feels like, okay, the Coachella show put some heat on kneecap. Anyone who's been following kneecap, this is not anything new for them. It is nothing that is unexpected. There is no way that the organizers of Coachella were surprised by this. If they were, that's on them. And then it's kind of like there's this backlash, not just from the public really, but from these influential Jerry Savile kind of disciples saying, oh, this is horrible. This isn't what music is about. This isn't why we have music festivals. Music isn't about protest or, showing solidarity. And when has it ever been? In England, of all places, crazy. And so it's kind of like they're being punished for this, but I think they're also being punished retroactively for the Coachella performance. Like, they didn't really do anything. Well, they didn't do anything now either. But it's kind of like people are really mad about that Coachella performance. Influential people, we need to get them next time they do something. That's how it seems.
No, exactly. They're trying to make the kneecap guys into an example. And if you're an artist who has any sympathies, whether you're an actor, musician, philanthropist, whatever the fuck, and you have any kind of sympathies towards Palestinians, they want you to be fucking literally canceled in the way that reactionaries are like, cancel culture this, but like people who are pro-Palestine are literally being canceled. Like that's literally true. Like kneecap are attempting to be canceled in the actual way that people can be canceled, which is in the legal realm. They're going to try to throw this guy in prison for something so innocuous.
Which, there's also a point, I would say, consciously picking, because we know that they fucking disappear and harass and victimize, black and brown people for showing their sympathies to Palestine, or to any solidarity to, any indigenous group, right? But especially Palestine. But there's a conscious attempt here to be like, oh, this is, a white person that we can show off that we're going to go after, too. Because that's the message they're trying to put out, is you are not safe to do this. You are not safe to talk about these things. There is no privileged group that you're in that we will not go after if given the opportunity, if you don't fall in line.
Exactly. And there's something to be said as well about the British government, because that's who's charging them, even though Northern Ireland is still technically part of the UK, but anybody in that country can be an Irish citizen if they want to. And the kneecap guys are Irish citizens on top of it. But the British government is going after them, punishing native Irish people on their own land for something that would not be a crime in the Republic of Ireland. That's crazy to think about when you think about it.
Which is them putting out another statement. They kind of get to kill two birds with one stone by doing this.
No, exactly. And to be fair, the Irish government has also denounced kneecap for specifically the kill a Tory statement that they made a couple years ago.
That's so stupid.
But at the same time, in Ireland, if they had flown a Hezbollah flag, I'll be honest, I don't think they probably would have gotten punished for that. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think they would have.
No, they had to be venturing out. They had to be, it's in the UK, so they're not really abroad, but they had to be outside of those bounds because they hold a lot of cultural sway in Ireland, right? So it had to be them venturing out and then dipping their toes into some unsavory waters and then the net being thrust down upon them.
Exactly. So, good luck, kneecap guys. We believe in you. Hopefully that terror charge gets dropped. But you know what, Brian? Speaking of things that are a little bit more positive, I want to move into a more positive direction. Let's get into our review this week. A little more posy, exactly. But this week, like I said, we're going to be reviewing both recent EPs from the band Cheem, Fast and Faster Fashion. Now, both these EPs came out last year in 2024. They're performed by the band Cheem. The personnel includes Sky Holden on rhythm guitar, backup vocals, and turntables, Sam Nazaretian on lead vocals, Sean Thomas on drums, Prince Porter on bass, and Gabe Weltzman on lead guitar and Pro Tools. Now, I saw, once again, Cheem, I want to say about 3 weeks ago as of recording, and I saw all the band members play except for Prince. Unfortunately, he was out from what they said was a family emergency that he had to fly back to Connecticut for, because this band's also from Connecticut. Oof. And I saw them in Milwaukee. So I'm sure that was not a particularly cheap flight. So I feel bad for him on that one.
Yeah, fuck.
Yeah, that sucks shit. But either way, I saw them, like I said, at a very small venue. I want to say there was maybe 40 people in that room. Maybe. We were tight, packed in there. They actually weren't even the headlining band. They were the third, or they were the second to last band. And I remember they went out there. Once again, they claimed that Prince was not going to play because of the, family issue going on. And they had a computer, and I thought like, oh, this is going to be interesting, I guess. We'll see how they cope. And dude, they fucking killed it. I am shocked they were able to perform as well as they did, because essentially it was 1.5 guitarists, a vocalist, and a drummer, but they somehow made it work. It was crazy that they were able to make a full sounding act like that. Is crazy to me.
When you told me about that, you told me about that story before I'd listened to either of these EPs, and I was like, oh, that's impressive. Once I listened to these EPs and had a better idea of the type of music that she make, it really struck me how impressive and weird that is, because so this is a tight band. Like on their records, they're already tight, which you can do through, lots of means in a recording, but for them to replicate that live is a band that would have to have been playing together for a long time and would have to know each other intimately. To be able to do that with a member missing, I think shows a pretty extreme ability to adapt, because these are not simple songs.
No, these are very complex songs. And in fact, this is also, I believe, the very first episode we've ever done where I actually reached out to the creators themselves on their thoughts on a few questions that Brian and I asked them. And I want to go, before we even talk about the EPs really, about their influences, because oh my God, their influences are crazy. I'm going through the messages here, and these are fucking wild influences. So I see Tool, Sublime, Justin Timberlake, 311, D'Angelo, Erykah Badu, and Primus and Chan. Now, Brian, would you believe that literally all those influences you could hear on these EPs, which is crazy, they were able to reconcile that?
That's the thing, is you can hear all of that pretty clearly. The only ones on there that I would say I don't hear super obviously are Tool and Erykah Badu. And even in those instances, once you know it's there, you see where those pieces of the puzzle fit in. And of course, that's, we've talked about nu metal a couple of times on the show in the past. That's the iconic millennial rock genre, I'd say, along with pop punk, which this group also dabbles in. But a kind of a watermark of that genre, right, is this weird mashing of genres. This band updates that in such a way that it's if you took every cast aside music genre, every cast aside classic of the mid 2000s, and you threw them together and said, make this all work together, you would get something kind of like this.
No, absolutely. It's a fucking marvel that they were able to make this work, as they've been able to do. And also, on top of it, too, I know we talked about it in, discussions before we recorded this episode, but these guys are, masters at, social media management. It's crazy how good they are at, their social media.
Which, when you see that, I know when I saw their social media before I properly listened to the EPs, and I thought, these guys have to be young. These guys have to at least be our age or younger, because nobody older than 35 is good at social media. They just aren't. If they're in the creative arts, they're just not. But being good at that, and being a band that, first of all, appeals to so many kind of fan groups, but also makes all those things work, and then being able to market yourself in an organic way is, it's a blessing and a gift and a true skill and craft all its own. But also, this band will probably have, or probably does have, a separate audience, right, from music lovers who are just people online. They're able to straddle that in a way that I just think most musical artists aren't.
No, 100%. And when I saw them live, they were also the only band there that had actual dedicated fans. There were these two guys, and they seemed like nice guys, but they were also by far the biggest guys there. They were well over 6 feet tall.
Yeah.
If I were to hazard a guess, they're probably close to 300 pounds, the both of them. And they were the only ones moshing. And I thought oh no, this room's already small enough. Please don't hurt me. And granted though, they were respectful. They were having fun. I wasn't mad about it, but I was just still my God, why are these two guys the ones moshing? Oh no. And honestly, more respect to those guys that they were respectful about it, but still I was just oh God, no.
Absolutely.
And then these EPs, Fast Fashion, the first one is 11 minutes and 46 seconds long, and Faster Fashion is 13 minutes and 49 seconds long. So under 25 minutes, which, for 11 tracks is great. It's one of those things where you get all the best parts of, as we were talking about earlier, the cast aside, fucking now are not blasé anymore. They're back in fashion, for lack of a better term, among TikTok Zoomers and stuff. But bands that even 10 years ago you would have been fucking laughed at for liking, Limp Bizkit,
in some cases,
Linkin dark and pop punk. Yeah.
Well, so not Limp Bizkit, who, are fun and sick, but so when we talk about pop punk here, right off the bat, I need to clarify, this is not a bad thing. It's just the way it is. This isn't really, what they're invoking is a very specific type of pop punk. It's not even necessarily like emo. It's specifically like DK dance. It is specifically the type of dancey kind of new wavy pop punk that was coming out on Pete Wentz's record label in the 2000s.
Yes,
it's a very
100%.
specific type of pop punk that is very tied to a specific time and place. And it is crazy to hear it so organically and lovingly brought back in 2025 to me.
Exactly, and brought back in a way that's very, like, as you talked about their social media, like, it's very social media friendly, it's very TikTok friendly, and I'm not even saying that like an insulting way. Like, these are, short quality tracks that are like all killer, no filler, basically. Like, that's the best way I could describe it. Like, I don't think there's any song on either of these EPs, I think that's over 3 minutes, I want to say. Okay, there's one that's 3 minutes long. But either way, like, these are like pretty short, like, radio-friendly style songs from a band that is, once again, a small independent band.
Yeah, every Cheem song is made up of 3 different songs that, if it were itself its own song, would be a radio-friendly rock or pop song. But they take them and mash them together in a kind of disorienting way.
In a disorienting way that, like I said, is still coherent and works.
No, is in a way that works. I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean disorienting, like in kind of unexpectedly, is maybe a better word than disorienting. Yes. A surprising way.
A surprising way. And on Rate Your Music, these are obviously not like, they don't have like thousands of reviews, but obviously this wasn't on Amazon. But on Rate Your Music, Fast Fashion has a 3.37 out of 5, and Faster Fashion has a 3.26 out of 5. So pretty positive. We've certainly reviewed albums and EPs that are way lower than that. So fans seem to have liked this quite a bit. And I would say on Rate Your Music, anything above a 3.5 is generally like considered very, very, very good. So for a small band like this has quite a few fans. And I am definitely part of that cohort, I will say, for both of these EPs.
Well, and the thing with this band, as soon as I listen to them, I can see how this band would build a very loyal and kind of rabid audience. Because first of all, they're hitting all of these markers of like, again, a certain era, which is why we're talking about it on our show, which is like this mid-2000s era of like radio rock, radio pop things. But also kind of the vibe is very feel-good, and it also invokes a lot of like the big populist chants of nu metal, or like the defend pop punk thing, this thing of we're all in it together and we're making our fucking happy music and we don't give a fuck. Like there's big like kind of auras of that oozing off of it, that the type of person that's into that shit is just going to be drawn to. It's going to speak so strongly to them. When you mix that musical side in with the kind of funny lyrics that are a little sassy and, again, very TikTok friendly, like there's a type of person that this is really going to hit with. And it hits with people now, but I think it would have hit with people in the mid 2000s too. I think if Cheem had come out with a few tweaks in like 2007, we would both have like known like 3 girls who were like obsessed with them.
No, absolutely, 100%. And to be fair, girls that I definitely had crushes on, but I know Brian.
Oh yeah,
I think we said in a previous episode that the girls that were unfortunately available to us at the time.
Yeah, exactly. That's a mean thing to say, but that is the truth. Those were the girls that were accessible to me. Were like the spork girls.
Yes. Oh God, but
which
yeah,
is fine.
Further. No, absolutely, it's totally fine. But without further ado, let's get to the track listing here. So the first track on Fast Fashion, which was the first EP released here, is Bootleg. And this is a fantastic opening track. Once again, as we talked about, showcasing the influences, different vocal styles in a way that matches very well. This is also the first song where Sky is doing his like more hip-hop inspired thing, which he is definitely the biggest hip-hop fan. I watched an interview with the Cheem guys, I want to say maybe about a week after I saw them. And Sky said he was very specifically influenced by the more rap, well, and to be for rap rock side too. I know he mentioned Earl Sweatshirt as an influence, although I think he said
that makes sense.
He liked them or he said
early Earl. I can see that. So this is maybe my favorite track by Cheem that I've heard. This is for me a standout. First of all, it's a little bit heavier than actually the whole first album or the whole first EP. Fast Fashion has some pretty heavy moments, but it really starts off like some kind of not sludgy, but some big caveman riffs. And the thing with Sky's kind of his verses, his rapping on it, is that it's actually pretty traditional rapping. It's kind of boom bap almost. Big Beastie Boys and Run DMC vibes on this track, which is a thing that I'm very much into. So right out the gates, starting with something like that was pretty accessible to me. It's a type of flow you don't hear from young rappers all that often, so it was exciting for me to hear someone doing that style.
No, and that makes sense too, because obviously you mentioned Run DMC and Beastie Boys, but these are a New York City area band on top of it too, so that they would
Oh,
have had that
that makes so
influence.
much sense.
Yeah, they're from, I don't want to say the exact town, or I don't remember the exact town, but I know it's like just outside of New York City, like probably with like a half an hour drive from New York City. So they are definitely a New York City area band. So that makes sense that they would have that sort of hip hop flow, or at least, like I said, be influenced by that at the very bare minimum, for sure. And then the next track on here is Motorola Razor. Now, this is the song that I know there's a music video for it that is a AMV, which, you know, to Zoomers who don't know what an AMV is, it's a very, very unfortunately millennial thing where like a popular band from most likely the 2000s would be paired up with essentially fan cam for Zoomers who don't know what the fuck like YouTube compilations are, like YouTube clips are, of various animes. And you know what? We talk about obviously how this sounds really cringy, right? But these guys are totally fucking self-aware of what they're doing here. Like they are very clearly trying to exemplify an aesthetic of mid 2000s, late 2000s nostalgia core, essentially. Like they know what they're doing here. This is like unironic, or this is ironic, but also like endearingly.
Yeah, they
way.
are exactly the right age. They are old enough to remember most of this stuff, if not all of it. They're old enough to know it and have like a genuine, like first-hand affinity for it. But they're young enough to understand why it's funny. To understand to do this, you have to do it with a wink and a nod. And I think the wink and the nod is what makes it. So it is insane to me, as someone who is in their 30s, that for Zoomers, that the 2000s are a nostalgia period. That is not anything about Cheem, just like to feed into like how different those times were growing up in them versus like seeing them now. And then I have to remember that's probably how like Gen Xers felt when I was really into shit from the 70s and 80s, right? But to me, it's crazy. It is crazy to look back at post 9/11 America and well, boy, I wish I could have been there. But then you get acts like these who take all these things and it makes me see them differently. It's seeing these people who are slightly younger than me kind of reinterpreting these things and shooting them back at me. And I'm going, oh, this is how this sounds to you. Because like I mentioned DK Dance and I listened to some of those bands when I was in high school. You couldn't really be into like popular punk bands and not listen to like some Fall Out Boy. I liked that first Fall Out Boy album, the Take This to Your Grave one. But to me, I think like that is a thing from the 2000s, that vocal style, that kind of swaggery kind of bravado thing. You know, I can't imagine it leaving that era. When I hear this band and I go, oh, it sounds different to you. Like you interpret it differently because they came at it at a different age than I did. It makes you think about things that you experienced firsthand in kind of a different way, for me at least.
No, absolutely. And of course, you mentioned obviously the Zoomers relating to, or at least seeing that era as like nostalgic. Like, I have a niece who is almost 20 years younger than me, and she's into the same stuff that like I would have, and like my friends would have been in high school. And to me, it's like, oh my God, the nostalgia cycle really is coming back in that way. Like, it's crazy. And of course, the nostalgia cycle comes back in, you know, waves of 20 years, of course. So we're now in 2025. So of course, things from the mid 2000s are going to be seen as the most trendy among like younger people, and that aesthetic coming
Classic
back,
things.
which
yeah,
exactly, like the very hot topic sort of like Spencer's gift stuff back then is very much like now in vogue for like TikTok teens essentially. But like, and
like,
also I do want to say the lyrics on this, which are essentially, you know, once again we talk about the nostalgia thing. This is a nostalgic throwback to like the weird sort of cringy romance things that we had in like very early high school, middle school. But it's in a way that it's like the fact that these guys more than likely didn't actually like experience these things around this time, but they actually are able to like channel that in a way that's authentic is kind of wild to me.
Yeah, it's kind of, there are things on here, right, where they're channeling a very specific thing. And, you know, it hits just those marks in a way like I could not describe to you until I listened to this album what like the post Pete Wentz, like DK Dance style, like the mix of like kind of R&B swagger and these really sharp, high in the mix kind of reverb drenched guitars and lyrics about how cool you are, but also everyone like is fucking down on you. Like I couldn't have articulated that as like a style until I listened to this and I went, oh, that was like a whole scene. There's like, you know, obviously Fall Out Boy, but then Panic and like Gym Class Heroes. Like this like younger band is taking lessons from this very specific weird thing that seems to me trapped in amber in that time and made it make sense with all of this other weird shit. Like, okay, in the 2000s, would you have thought of like nu metal and like Fall Out Boy type pop punk like coexisting? In retrospect, that makes sense, but at the time, would that have made sense to you?
No, not at all. In fact, I was very down on pop punk. I was a nu metal kid to the fucking core. You know, essentially it was like back in the 90s, it was like metal and hardcore. Like they were starting to intermix. Of course, we had crossover and stuff that were, you know, coming to the fruition, and thrash and stuff like that. But like even up until like the late 80s, early 90s, like hardcore and metal, like if you were a metal guy who went to a hardcore show, you probably would have gotten your fucking ass kicked. And like
vice versa.
And if you were at a pop punk, if you were a pop punk kid at a nu metal show, you probably would have gotten your fucking ass kicked in like the 2000s. I'll be honest with you. Like it might have been a fucking problem for you. But the fact that these genres are able to mix in that way, that once again it's coherent and makes sense, it's genuinely fucking wild.
And when you hear this band do it, you go, oh, of course these things go together. Of course these make sense. One of the things I was thinking about is how both of those genres are full of lyrics about how fucking you're really fucking cool, but nobody else can see it, right? Like that to me is like a core component of like, say, a band like, you know, again, Fall Out Boy or even like Brand New or something. It also is kind of like a Fred Durst thing. It's like, I actually have a lot of sway. I'm really fucking chill, but everyone else is fucking with me all the time.
No, absolutely. And also at the live show, Sky referenced Fred specifically because he had like a baseball cap and turned it around. And I'm like, my man.
Nice. Yes.
And then following up on Motorola Razr, the next one is Charm Bracelet, which Charm Bracelet, that was definitely a thing that was, 20, 25 years ago. That was another like teenage romance nonsense thing. But this is also a really great song that plays into those, once again, nostalgic, I guess for lack of a better word, like consumer memorabilia things that just really works. And this is like another really solid, like this is a solid pop punk song, whereas the last one was like an AMV style, like anime song. But this one's more of like just a classic pop punk style song.
This is full on. Yeah, this sounds like something off of From Under the Cork Tree, like very much. The only thing that kind of makes it veer a little far out of that is so most of their songs have some kind of, I don't know if what you'd call EDM kind of backdrop to them, at least some element of it. And this song has that, it kind of has kind of a Dreamcast lobby sound going on.
Well, and that's the thing. That's also a style that they play around with. Like a lot of their Instagram posts mention Sonic Adventure 2. They mentioned Persona. Like they mention Jet Set Radio or, Jet Set Radio Future, like stuff like that. Like they have that aesthetic down really well. They mention Wii Sports. Like they mention a lot of stuff on there. They actually opened up a couple shows playing the Wii Sports theme, which is hilarious on guitar. Like these guys are fucking hilarious, honestly.
I didn't know that, but that is cool to know because there are many times listening to this album where I was like, oh, this is giving me Sonic Adventure vibes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then the next track on here is Jock Horror. Now, this is the first song that has very explicit, like, metalcore, like, chug-chugging, which is very interesting to me. This is, I would say, maybe the heaviest song on the album so far. Definitely on the instrumental side. My
notes for Jock Horror just say Nerd Pit.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, this is another great song. This is one of the longer songs in the EP. I believe this is oh, no, never mind. This is the middle length song. This is the third longest, so right in the middle here. But yeah, this one's also really good. This one has pretty solid lyrics, as, a lot of the rest of the EP does. And I remember they were talking about making a music video for this, but they never got around to it, unfortunately. But this one was definitely a little bit more literal. This one would have been like the I'm being bullied by jocks sort of pop punk style of imagery, I think.
Yeah, no, it's another lyrical theme that, well, we didn't think about at the time, connects pop punk and nu metal.
Yes, absolutely. And then the last song on this EP is Fake Fans. Now, this is also the longest song on both the EPs. This one's 3 minutes and 17 seconds long. Now, for my money, I think this is easily my favorite song on both these EPs. This is like a B-side from a band like 20 years ago. It's legitimately like that good. Like this could have been a major release 20 years ago, or a major release song at the very bare minimum. Like there's that sort of like R&B instrumentation at the very beginning, like very funky bass lines from Prince. Yep. And, we keep talking about the decadence thing. Like Sam is obviously very influenced by Patrick Stump and Brendan Urie. Like you can very much hear it in his vocal style.
It's crazy. He sounds so much like Patrick Stump.
Yes, and he's talked, very explicitly in interviews how he gets a little tired of the Brendan Urie comparisons because he's trying to do more of the Patrick Stump thing.
Like, I'm sorry,
no,
but it's
and to be fair, not in like a jerk way where he's like, I'm better than that, but like he's just I have other influences too kind of thing.
That's fair, yeah.
I definitely hear very much Brendan Urie and Patrick Stump, and especially on the latter EP, Faster Fashion, I definitely hear more Brendan Urie. But yeah, Patrick Stump on this song for sure. It is very evident. And, you know, it's one of those things where I've always liked Patrick and, well, not Brendan Urie as much because I think he's kind of he's a dingus. I'll just say that. I've never liked Brendan Urie that much. But, and to be fair, Sam has also said that one of his biggest influences was A Fever You Can't Sweat Out by Panic, which makes so much sense.
You can hear that through I'm sorry, there is not a song on either of these EPs where you cannot hear that. I'm not saying that derisively. That's just, what was the whole thing with Fever You Can't Sweat Out? It mixed these Baroque kind of glam rock influences with EDM and pop punk. Like, of course members of this band would have listened the hell out of that album. As for Fake Fans, yeah, probably the best song on the album. They play up kind of the R&B elements. There's a cool funk bass line. That's probably my favorite thing this band does, is like the R&B thing, because I've listened in the last like maybe 4 years or so, I have gotten really into R&B. It's become more of like a genre that I spend time with. And that's kind of a thing that when they do it, it's not that it's surprising. It makes sense in their sound, but it's a thing you don't see a lot from like rock bands. You see it more now than you did back in the day, but it's still pretty novel. The other thing that hits me is, I mentioned before that they find lyrically this way to meet like the Pete Wentz lyrics and the Fred Durst lyrics. They make these two worlds coexist and meet in the middle and make sense. And I think that is really on display on Fake Fans, which is a song about these complicated feelings about meeting people that are kind of shady and you're sketched out by, and you're kind of like not sure how to feel about them. It's also a very braggadocious song. That's another thing that I think a recurring vibe with Cheem that I assume they got from both the new metal and pop punk cast is like the kind of boisterousness, which again, people love. It really resonates. I feel like if you're a fan of this band, that boisterousness it's going to rub off on you and you're going to feel a really strong solidarity with this band because of it.
Yeah, you know, I totally know what you mean when you talk about, obviously, like you said, the braggadocious thing. And also, on top of it, too, I do have a message from the Cheem guys once again. So I asked them about the lyrical themes that they've been going for, and they say on these specific EPs that it's a lot of songs about romantic relationships and platonic relationships, which you can definitely hear from a lot of the lyrics on here. And I think also the way that both Sky and Sam harmonize on these songs is maybe the strongest on both these EPs to me. Like, I think these are just fucking fantastic lyrics. I love the way they harmonize on here. And also this song is very much, it could be about, like you said, Fake Fans, which I do agree too, but it's obviously about a relationship that's failing.
Yeah.
And maybe the fake fan is the relationship itself, if you think about it.
Right. It's like kind of layering these different things. So like it's on the most literal level, it's about a relationship, but then it's saying fake fans and it's using some vernacular that kind of like, to me, is kind of like directed at clout chasers and social media. And it's kind of layering these two possible interpretations together so it can be about multiple things at once, which again is a very like 2000s pop punk type thing to do lyrically as well.
It is. It's one of those things where you mentioned, obviously, the decadence thing. And I think it's interesting how they're able to bring that style of, like, essentially fuck the haters kind of thing into the 2025 era that we're going at now. Like, they mentioned selfie and, you know, talk about how there's a lot of vernacular in here that is very modern, but also is very retro at the same time. So, yeah, when I mentioned this is my favorite song about the EPs, like, this is, to me, the song I think stands out by far the most. And, like, this is a song that would get them on tour with, like, a bigger band. I think this would be a pretty strong contender for me, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think if you were going to show someone a Cheem song, if you were going to say like, hey, there's this band, they mix a lot of seemingly disparate influences from kind of 2000s rock, from alternative rock, and, you know, from pop music at the time, and, you know, someone was, let's say, kind of skeptical, or they weren't understanding how that was going to work, this would be the best track to show them. It's kind of heavy, again, kind of like a pop R&B thing sliding in. It all comes together really clearly, and it's also a little bit longer, which I think might actually make it a little bit more accessible, because, well, one of Cheem's strengths and one of the things they do that's really impressive is that they cram all of these ideas into some very short songs, or some pretty short songs. This song being a little longer might give those ideas kind of more time to sit with the listener, especially a new listener, and kind of say like, okay, this is what this band's doing, this is what this song is, you know, because again, you know, most very popular songs are what, 3 minutes, 3:50.
Yeah, about 3.5 minutes long is generally the accepted length of most, like, radio songs. I think it's like 90% of songs are radio songs throughout history, roughly at about 3 to 3.5 minutes long. So yeah, so that is Fast Fashion. So part 2, we're going to get into Faster Fashion. Now, the first song in this is WTFU, Wake the Fuck Up. Now, this is the song that really blew up on social media a couple weeks ago. This was the song that was on their most famous Instagram reel, which I think has 1 million views, or will have but 1 million views. views by the time this episode comes out. So this was the song that really blew them up, where they're playing in a parking lot. And it's something along the lines of like, when a band sounds like a mix of Persona 6 and System of a Down, it's awesome. Like it's such a good caption. And like I said, these guys are so good at social media. It's wild.
Well, and this song, this is an interesting song to start off this EP with, because this is easily the heaviest and most rock-oriented song on this EP, but it's also heavier than a lot of the things on the first EP, right? It's very much like nu metal forward in its influences. Which also to me makes sense that it blew up on TikTok, because big, heavy, kind of crunchy riffage on it, kind of declarative vocals, declarative lyrics. Very, I don't know, what do they call that lip syncing thing they do on TikTok? Do they call that quoting or whatever? But it's very, very quote friendly, I would say.
No, absolutely. Like this could be in a lot of TikToks on, it could be like quoting, or could be like, some like TikTok teen doing like a dance that's like, has like the nu metal backing on it, essentially. Like this could be like a really big viral song. And it kind of has in, the realm that these guys are in. But like I said, I think this is a band that, or I think I mentioned it to you before we recorded, but like this is a band that to me, that if they don't blow up outside of like social media wise, I'd be shocked. Like this is a band that has basically all the components of being a band that could at the very least be an opening band for like a bigger band out there at the very bare minimum.
And they have such a dedicated, like built-in cult audience who their sound will appeal to so strongly. And that's why you saw already two guys at their show that were there all about Cheem there, because it's maybe a cult audience, but it's a sizable one that this band is like made for. The other thing before we move past this track that I need to point out, because I couldn't get it out of my head, is this song sounds like fucking Maximum the Hormone.
You mentioned that earlier, and I'm like, oh my God, I definitely hear Maximum the Hormone.
I actually think Maximum the Hormone are probably the closest thing I can think of in some ways to a band that I would compare just musically, flat on its face, to Cheem. They don't typically sound alike, but the mix of influences, the aesthetic, makes sense. This particular track, and again, I don't think it's necessarily because Cheem were thinking of Maximum the Hormone, but again, it's, they're influenced by Tool, they're influenced by probably like NoFX and probably like System of a Down, right? So they share all these influences, but on this particular song, it comes together, and I was like, any listeners don't know, Maximum the Hormone are a Japanese nu metal / power pop kind of skate punk band. Absolute great band. If you like Cheem, you should listen to Maximum the Hormone. Again, they don't exactly sound alike, but I think they'll hit a lot of the same boxes. But that's not to say that Cheem sound like Maximum the Hormone, because I don't really think they do for the most part. But on this particular track, all of those things come together in that way for me.
Yes, and well, speaking of anime, Maximum the Hormone did the theme song for Death Note. I think it was the first or second season, I think. I could be wrong about that.
I think it was the first season. I need to tell a short story about how I discovered Maximum the Hormone, because you brought up the Death Note connection. So I was this big fucking like music spaz. I was really stuck up. I was always looking for different music in like high school and middle school. And one of my friends that I went to high school with was a guy who is not like a big music nerd. He was a big anime nerd. And he liked like very like cutesy anime, and he liked very popular anime. And one time he said, Brian, I burned you a CD by a band I think you'll like. They're Japanese. They're called Maximum the Hormone. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. How does Billy know this band? I've never heard of them. And I, at the time, didn't watch any anime. I've come to like some anime now, but at the time I didn't. And I'm listening to this, I'm going, wow, how did Billy find out about this crazy band? I guess he's actually pretty cool. Maybe he just knows a lot about Japanese rock. About 10 years later, I was finally watching Death Note, and I saw their song come on the end credits, and I went, fuck, that's how my fucking friend learned about them. Here I was like, maybe he's secretly really cool and hip. Nope, just learned about him from an anime.
That's so fucking funny. Oh, Jesus. And then the next song on here is the title track for this EP, Faster Fashion. Now, this is definitely the most straightforward rap rock track, I would say, pretty easily on both these EPs. And this is the song that, I think we've mentioned it a little bit before we recorded this, but the band that Cheem want to most play with, and they messaged me this directly, was the band 311. This is very 311 inspired, this song is.
Yeah.
Very 311 inspired.
Good time party music is what I have in my notes. This is also a very nu metal straightforward song. Again, very 311. It's like nu metal without all the misery, without all the abuse. It is crazy to me to think that Cheem have this many haters.
Well, and that's the thing though, too, right, though, is that like they may or may not, obviously, but at the same time, too, just like with anything, if you want to, I guess, build an audience and build like just whatever, you have to manufacture at least a little bit of outrage. You know, for example, I have listened to, and of course, you know, Brian and I, we grew up with this, but I know we're both not fans of this today. But the South Park guys have talked about how, like, you know, how people talk about how South Park is, you know, controversial to this and that, but they said early on they actually had very few controversial moments. Like they had to manufacture a lot of their controversy early on to get their name out there. And, you know, Limp Bizkit did the exact same thing. You know, Fred Durst is always talking about his haters, this and that and this and that. But they didn't really have any haters until Significant Other. Like, early on, they were actually kind of, like, fairly within their realm, at least kind of critical darlings. And then Fred Durst really played up, like, the douchebag element. And that's when they really blew up. That's when they actually started getting haters.
Yeah, Fred Durst is another big Fred Durst moment lyrically on here. And again, not to keep going back to it, the Pete Wentz thing. You go back to his whole thing, even on the first follow-up album was, I'm a big sellout. I'm a big pretentious asshole. I'm very shallow. Everybody hates me. Nobody knew who he was at that point, but he knew that if he could come out and be like, I'm just this huge, like, narcissistic asshole, that it would make him seem really annoying to a subset of people, and then they would be mad at him, and then he could be, like, fighting against those anti-fans forever, right? So that's kind of what this reminds me of.
No, absolutely. And also, obviously, I mentioned the 311 influence here. But also, I do want to say, too, is that, like, especially for a band of the size, like, Sky is a very good, like, he's a very good white rapper. And I'm saying that in, like, the nicest way possible. He's on the level, to me, of, like, fucking Mike Shinoda. Like, he's very Mike Shinoda inspired on a lot of the songs that he's rapping on. And, like, and once again, I'm saying this in the nicest way possible, because Mike Shinoda's been kind of clowned on over the years for being corny or whatever. But, like, Sky is very good at this. Like, he's a very good white rapper. I want to be very clear.
So Sky's deal to me, like I've said, and I don't want to put too fine a point on it, my personal favorite parts of Cheem are kind of the R&B influence and then like the more hip-hop centric stuff. And so when I was listening to these EPs this week, the thing with Sky is I had the same thought, very Mike Shinoda. And what's Mike Shinoda's kind of flow? Like it's very, I like Mike Shinoda. I enjoy Linkin Park. They're fun songs. It's serviceable. You can tell he likes, you know, he thinks about flow. He thinks about word choice. And it's very like calls back to kind of an earlier era of hip-hop. It's not super technical. It's not a super like outlandish flow like you might get from someone like Danny Brown. It's very like straightforward lyrical. Sky kind of does that, but he adds a little bit of like New York bite like you'd get from like some New York boom bap guy. So it's like the Mike Shinoda kind of like workman-like, straightforward, you know, lyrical punch with the New York City bite.
No, exactly. Like that Northeast accent flair to a certain extent. But, and that's the thing though too, is that, you know, like I said, people kind of clown on Mike Shinoda, but Mike Shinoda is a very competent rapper. Like he's very competent. Like,
and a great producer. Like a great hip-hop
producer. You know, of course, we talked about his soundtrack on the Raid episode because, of course, he was instrumental in that soundtrack.
We've talked about this many times. I was not into nu metal until later in life, and it took our friendship for me to really open up to it. Much later in life, though, I listened to the reviled Linkin Park album, Reanimation. And I remember listening to it. This is within the last, like, 5 years, right? I listened to that album for the first time. You know, I'm now divorced from all of the Linkin Park hate. I'm divorced from, like, my personal, like, you know, listening to them when I was 8 years old or whatever. I can listen to it totally separate and by myself. And I thought, like, oh, this is Mike Shinoda really showing off, like, his hip-hop credentials. And, like, Linkin Park fans, as far as I know, hate Reanimated, but it's, like, very much like a love letter to kind of experimental, like, New York hip-hop.
I'm genuinely shocked that people hate Reanimation. I thought that was actually like a pretty well-liked like remix album.
I'm someone outside of the Linkin Park fandom or whatever, so that was my understanding. I could be wrong about that.
I mean, it's totally possible, but no, Reanimation is very, at least in my opinion, I think is a really good remix album. And I'm not a big remix album fan in the first place. Like I generally like songs to be how they are. I'm not a big fan of remixes, but like I think that's a really fucking fantastic album. And I know it was actually pretty influential.
Yeah, probably like the cloud rap kind of scene probably was into Reanimation and stuff. Speaking of kind of unusual influences, maybe even secret influences on Cheem, and I'm going to whisper this, I don't want to put anyone on the spot here. Do you think any of these guys listened to Crunkcore?
You know, I think it's possible. They did not mention that.
Like when they were really young, when they were like kids.
Oh yeah, totally possible. Like, and that's the thing, we've talked about crunkcore and how it's actually way more influential to a lot of like TikTok audiences today than people would like to think. Of course, we mentioned that, what is it? Hyperpop is basically just fucking crunkcore
Hyperpop,
for Zoomers.
Cloud Rap again, like Tekashi 69 and Extentacion, fucking Trippy Red, Mario Judah, all of those guys have said, that when they were kids, they were listening to fucking crunkcore. And yeah, Hyperpop, which is, I don't know, sometime we'll have to do a Hyperpop discussion, but I'm not looking forward to it.
I mean, there's a reason why Broken Side are going back on tour, because I think they've realized their influence. No, they are. Broken Side are going back on tour, Brian. Are you going to see Broken Side in 2025?
Okay, so one of my things with a certain type of pop punk, let's say any type of pop punk that came out post Enema of the State, is that I think, like, I listened to some of that music, some of that Hot Topic emo and stuff, and some of it's okay, but a lot of it you listen to and you think, how can you be older than 20 years old and still feeling okay about making this music? Now, with crunkcore, it's like, how can you be older than like 16 or 14 years old and be okay with listening to this music?
I think it's one of those things where, like, we talked about the nostalgia thing. Like, there are plenty of people our age who are like, oh, yeah, I fucking loved Broken Side when I was, like, 14 or whatever. And it's, like, a nostalgia thing for them. And they see these guys. And by the way, I've seen, like, more modern footage of Broken Side. And one of the guys is balding bad.
Well, he'd have to be. And that's fine. But that's why you stop making this kind of music, man. Just tangentially, Dahvie Vanity is also completely bald.
Interesting. Maybe some karma. Actually, he deserves way more karma than balding, let's be clear.
He deserves to be fucking castrated.
Agreed. But, we keep mentioning the cadence. So the next song on here is Slushy. Now, this is a song that is very much playing up the Panic at the Disco influence. I would say maybe the strongest on both these EPs. Especially, I think, A Fever You Can't Sweat Out, and then, of course, later Panic stuff. Definitely not Pretty Odd, because that one's the, like, fucking black sheep of that discography. Although I still think that's the best album, but it's literally just ripping off the Beatles.
For me, that was, even at the time, and even more so now, I'm further with it, that's got to be the best Panic record, because it's just pretty, right? It's a Beatles ripoff. That's why it's good.
No, absolutely. I 100% agree. I think Pretty Odd is easily Panic's best album. I think they have 1.5 good albums, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, what's the album they did after that one where they're trying to sound like Morrissey, the one with Mona Lisa on it?
God, that's a good question. I literally just wrote off Panic after.
That's the last one I heard. And I remember when it came out, I heard it and I was like, oh, they are just straight up. And they were always pretty influenced. Even on Fever You Can't Sweat Out, they're like clearly influenced by the Smiths and Morrissey. They're called Panic at the Disco. But I remember they did the album after Pretty Odd, and I was like, oh, they're doing a Beatles thing. That's interesting. And then after that, it was just like a lot of emo and pop punk bands. It was just full on like Morrissey cosplay.
No, absolutely, yeah.
But yeah, Slushy, for me, I actually didn't think of Fever You Can't Sweat Out on this track. I thought of From Under the Cork Tree by Fall Out Boy. Really sharp guitars and big harmonies, although there's some crossover with that album and Fever, of course.
No, absolutely, yeah. And then the next track is Unlimited. Now, this one is, once again, I hear Panic, and I also hear the Linkin Park mix on this, which is very interesting. Like, two bands that, back in the day, even though their fan bases would have been probably fairly similar, were not styles you could have mixed together and would have been like, wait, really?
Right. But in retrospect, it makes so much sense to mix those two bands. But at the time, you would not have thought of it. Now, under Unlimited, literally, my only notes are, have you heard the first Panic album with all the EDM beats? Those are my notes on Unlimited.
Yeah. No, honestly, like, this series of, like, 3 tracks, and the next one on here is Kinetic Energy, and they're all very Panic-inspired.
Maybe in the case of the next track, you might say Gym Class Heroes, even.
Yes, very much so. So yeah, very much, once again, 2010s hip-hop instrumental is on here too. Like,
kind of crunky.
Kind of crunky, exactly. And like, we've talked a little bit about Prince, who unfortunately was not able to see live, but like his bass style, and I don't know if you've ever seen like actual footage of him playing bass, he's a fucking fantastic bassist. Like, he's so good. He plays a very funky, like, very like tap-heavy style.
I did look up live footage of Cheem after my first couple of listens to the EPs this week. In general, like, live, they all look incredible. Watching Prince play was like really exciting for me because, again, there's a lot of, like you said, tap heavy. There's a lot of like techniques he uses that you don't see in like heavy metal or pop punk or really alternative rock a lot, that are clearly coming more from like kind of a soul and funk background, even though he is like rocking the fuck out. It's pretty cool to see.
No, absolutely. And when I got the message from the Cheem guys saying that Primus was a big influence on Prince, I'm like, oh,
Yes.
I definitely hear that.
Yeah, it's the thing of like playing bass like it's a lead instrument, which is now pretty common. But I mean, he manages to do this thing that it's, usually you've got a bass player who plays the bass like it's a lead, and then it's up to the guitar to keep the rhythm. Or you're a bass player and you play the rhythm and you hold down the low end. He's kind of doing both simultaneously. Like he manages to hold the low end down and kind of keep the band together while also doing these crazy leads and things. It's very cool.
It is 100%. And, we've talked obviously about Prince on bass. Gabe is a great lead guitarist. He's once again the guy that does Pro Tools too. So like being good at Pro Tools as a musician is a pretty integral skill at this point, I would say. Very
Essential.
Much so. Very, very essential. And Sean is the drummer. He's also a great drummer, although he doesn't get to play as much on this band. Although apparently, I don't know if this is true or not, but on the reels, it's alluded to that he used to be like a death metal drummer, which I can definitely hear a little bit of that on some of these tracks, but he's not allowed to play as much because this is obviously not as much of a drum heavy style that they're trying to go for. And then Sky, once again, he's a great backup vocalist. He's very much, he is the Mike Shinoda of this group, just bar none. Essentially, that's what he is. Like he raps like Mike Shinoda, he plays rhythm guitar like Mike Shinoda, and on top of it too, he's the guy that is responsible for a lot of the production. He also does the like record scratches on here. Like he really is, like I said, the Mike Shinoda of this group in a lot of ways, I would say.
Well, and in general, talking about this not having as much kind of as other rock bands, not being as, live drum forward, especially shows through on this album versus Fast Fashion. Because my read on this over the week, the last few days listening to both these EPs, Fast Fashion feels, obviously there's a mix of genres, but it does feel like it centers more on like the kind of alternative rock influences. And it seems like following that up with Faster Fashion, they move a little farther afield of the rock core and kind of spend more time in their kind of like outlying genres, right? Kind of like you get like the core Cheem sound on Fast Fashion, and then they're kind of like, all right, we're going to show you what else we're into and we're doing.
No, absolutely. Like, even though, yeah, these are, EP1, EP2, they're clearly, part one and part two, but they're stylistically similar, but stylistically different at the same time, which is
they're companions.
Refreshing. They're companion pieces, absolutely. And then the last song on here is Instinct. Now, we talked about, obviously, all these bands' influences, right? But this song, I think, really exemplifies what this band is to me. And it's one of those things, too, where, like, I know this is a huge influence on basically any fucking, like, guitar-driven band, rock band, whatever the fuck you want to call it, in the last 10 or 15 years. But this is, in my opinion, easily the most Linkin Park-inspired song. And in my opinion, Cheem are very much a Linkin Park-like band. As I mentioned, Sky is, like, the Mike Shinoda. Sam is very much the Chester, R.I.P. to Chester. And, we have these... And I want to be clear, like, Sean, Prince, and Gabe are much better instrumentalists than the instrumentalists in Linkin Park. Like...
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Like...
Unquestionably. Objectively.
Oh, yeah. Like, fucking, once again, Chester, rest in peace, Mike and Joe, they were like 95% of the talent of Linkin Park. Easily. Whereas all five of these guys, I would say, are just as instrumental, pun intended, as the rest of them. So, in my opinion, like I said, I think these guys have a big future fucking ahead of them. And this track is very good. Sky is not so much rapping on this, but yeah, he's very much doing the Mike Shinoda, like, and, Chester. Well, he's also channeling Chester in some of these deliveries, too, in his lyrics, too.
My only notes for this song literally just say Linkin Park influence apparent, seems more serious than their other songs.
Yes, very much so. And, it's one of those things, too, where we've talked about how, obviously, we like both of these EPs. They're both very good EPs. But, like, especially for a band of this size and, for what I'm assuming, once again, I'm assuming these budgets aren't huge because these were both independently released by the band themselves. But these EPs sound fucking fantastic. Like, they're extremely well-produced EPs. Like, everybody is in the mix very well in a way that's, like, not fucking blown out.
And this is, your mileage may vary on this, of course, but this is mixed like a mid-2000s kind of pop punk album. Everything is mixed very clearly. Everything feels very digital. Everything feels very clean. So, like, if that is, like, a style and a scene that you're into, again, I hate to keep relaying the DK dance bands to this, but, like, if you're into that whole sound, they capture it. I mean, they don't copy it. They sound like something else. Obviously, they've got these, EDM elements and new metal elements, but, like, all the way down to their production. These really sharp guitars and these, kind of stop on a dime, start stops on the instrumentation. They really capture that.
No, they very fucking much do. Yeah. Both these EPs are absolutely fucking fantastic. And, it's one of those things, right, where like in general, and I'm not going to say I'm immune to like fucking algorithm stuff, right? But when this was introduced to me, I thought there's really a band that basically itches all of my like musical, like things that I love, right? Like this is the scratch that I needed for basically all of my musical itches. And when I listen to it, I'm like, okay, so it's got, the 2000s like Dreamcast, like nostalgia thing going on. You have like pop punk and emo and nu metal. And like, I'm like, how the fuck is a band like this making music like this in a way that actually makes sense and is like coherent? And like, this is just a band that is like an anomaly that it all works out in a way. And the fact that I got to see these guys live is just fucking fantastic. Because even though these are, once again, guys who are very much up and coming, these are not like big, this is not like a big band going on here. They're playing shows for a room full of people essentially, but they are making music that could easily sell out like a small to medium sized venue. I would say easily.
This is, again, like, Taylor, you just described all the stuff you're into that you never expected or even considered seeing together, like how it hits all these marks for you, right? That's a whole audience of people who are going to find this band, especially because they're good at branding and they're good at social media. Like, that is such a built-in audience of aging millennials and then, like, younger people who are who didn't get to experience that firsthand, who are going to be drawn to it. The same way that, like, younger people, like, not to be too dramatic with it, the same way that younger people who didn't get to, like, experience The Clash wanted to see Green Day in the mid-90s. This is going to be that for, like, Zoomers who are into, like, Fall Out Boy and Panic at the Disco and shit. I can't believe I just made that comparison. I'm actually a little upset with myself, but that's what it is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, especially considering at this point, Fall Out Boy are basically just making like electronic driven pop music, and Panic at the Disco, quote unquote, broke up. But of course, for the last like 10 plus years of the band's existence, it was just Brendan Urie. So like, who gives a fuck? But like, at the same time, you're right. And these are guys who will play a show for $15. You know what I mean? And you could hear that like quality of music, that quality of stage presence, just like the down to earthness, the fact they answered our fucking question.
The accessibility. Yeah.
So yeah, these guys are absolutely fucking killing it on the social media game. They have like, I think last time I checked, they've increased their audience by like 20% since that Instagram fucking reel came out that went viral. Like these guys are making a name for themselves in the like independent music scene. And I really hope they go further. And also, actually, speaking of going further, I just remembered now, they sent us a message that, and I may cut this out, I'm not sure, but they say that they're coming out with a full length EP in the near future with longer songs on it. So I'm excited to hear what that sounds like.
So what's a full-length EP?
Or I'm sorry, full-length album. That's what I meant. Sorry.
Okay, I was confused.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Sorry, a full-length LP. Sorry. And they said I think they said they had a couple that were 4+ minutes. So I'm excited to hear what that sounds like too.
What are they, a fucking prog band now?
Yeah.
Fucking Dillinger Escape Plan over here. Dillinger Escape.
No, absolutely. And also just a little bit of an Easter egg I just saw while on the Faster Fashion link on their Bandcamp, but they're selling the digital album for $3.11. So you can clearly tell their influence there.
Well, I think one of the big innovations of 311, a band that I don't know much about, but I know that they have a cool song called Guns Are for Pussies, which I like just because it's a great title, is like they're doing kind of like, not metal, but kind of like heavier kind of rock that's like very good vibes, very party-hardy music. That's a very specific tradition that bands like 311 and I guess Sublime take part in, that I would say Cheem are right in line for. That's the new party hardy good times hard rock band.
No, absolutely. And 311 have a giant cult following. Like they have a yearly festival called 311
people
Fest.
love them. People fucking love 311. People are ride or die for that band.
No, absolutely. All right, but do we have any final thoughts before we get to our pluggables, Brian?
So this is an odd band. It's a band that, we almost had to talk about for the podcast. As soon as Taylor told me, so he told me about seeing them live, and I knew, I was like, oh, we're going to talk about them for the podcast, because we almost have to. And then when I heard them, I was like, oh, yeah, this is very much like, it is all things millennial coming around again in a new and kind of stranger and kind of mutated way. So we do have to talk about it. I don't know if I would recommend it necessarily to anyone who is an OG fan of all of those genres. Like, I I don't think most of the people that I knew that were into nu metal at the time probably wouldn't love Cheem. Likewise, a lot of the people I knew who were into like that first Fall Out Boy album, Take This to Your Grave, this might not be something that they immediately see this is similar to, but if you're someone who kind of looking back, like how I think about music is I think about everything happening in threads. I think about everything as being constantly atomized, blown up, and rearranged in all these different ways. And this band is absolutely doing that. And it's all in ways, one of my favorite things, right, is when an artist takes seemingly disparate influences and puts them together in a way where it feels like they were always meant to be together like that. And I feel like that is kind of what Cheem do. You know, you take like the kind of 80s kind of New York rap thing, and then you've got these kind of smooth, dancey, melodic EDM beats, and then these nu metal breakdowns, and these kind of sugary pop punk harmonies. And it's all stuff that, again, at the time, we wouldn't have thought of going together. When you listen to Cheem, it seems like they invented all of those sounds to go together. It makes so much sense when they do it all together. It doesn't seem glaring. It doesn't seem gimmicky. It just sounds like that's how they sound.
No, absolutely. And, you know, my final thoughts, of course, I've waxed very positively on all these songs. I think these are all great songs about these EPs. This is a band that I would 100% recommend checking out. They have a very good Instagram page where they post, I would say, actually pretty funny reels for the most part, especially the ones that are more like detached style where they're kind of clowning on themselves, but it's clear they're like very self-referential in there. Once again, we talked about the quality of the songs here. Like, you know, we keep talking about the social media thing. Like most bands that are trying to become like, you know, I guess internet famous or like try to like go viral with their songs or whatever, a lot of those bands suck shit. They're terrible. Like, who's that TikTok guy who's always, oh my god, you know who the fuck I'm talking about, right, Brian? The NX or something?
Oh yeah. Well, we're gonna talk about him, maybe not for a full episode, but I do want to talk about the kind of alternative, the hot topic alt boy revival. XT2, is that his name?
Yes, that's it. XT2. Yeah, that guy fucking sucks.
There's also another guy named Youngblood who's like the British XT2.
Yeah, honestly, like all that shit's cringe, but these guys are able to, yeah, once again, be really good at social media, make really good fucking music, have good stage presence. They seem like nice guys. They're magnanimous enough to reach out, you know, respond back to our requests for questions and stuff like that. So we respect the fuck out of that. So yeah, and if these guys are touring in your area, you know, once again, I paid $15 to see them, and along with 3 other bands, they're absolutely worth fucking seeing. Like, I'm serious. Like, I mean, I wouldn't spend like $1,500 to see them, obviously, but you know, for a small touring band, they're 100% worth seeing.
And more to the point, to anyone listening to this, just because it's important, if there are local shows going on in your town and you can see 3 or 4 bands for $15, you should fucking go. Whether you like the bands, whether you've even heard of any of them or not, you should do that, because you're seeing 4 bands for nothing. You're getting to have a night out, you're going to a local bar, maybe you're getting some drinks, maybe you're not. You're seeing 4 fucking bands, and maybe you're learning about them all, and maybe you'll really like one of them. So if that happens in your town, you should fucking go to shows.
Yeah, 100%. All right, so that is the episode for tonight on Fast and Faster Fashion. Now, let's get into our pluggables before we fall asleep, because we're old-ass millennials. So you can follow and subscribe to us on both our YouTube and our Spotify channel, where we're uploading every episode simultaneously to both platforms. And as well, you can follow me at Carlos Chantor on Twitter.com. And as well as always, you know, of course, we've talked about small creators doing amazing things. Of course, Scott, Sean, and Robert are creating a fantastic series called Lucifer and the Father. You know, they are currently in pre-production, as we mentioned in the last couple episodes. You know, they've, I think, got a quarter of their funding so far for their series, but they need obviously more moral and financial support to continue on the series and get their series off the ground even more than it already is. So please donate to the campaign. And of course, as always, if you know, just send us an email, send us a YouTube comment, just, you know, tell us that you donated. We will, within reason, match those donations. And, you know, of course, we want Scott, Sean, and Robert's dream of creating Lucifer and the Father to become a reality. And Brian, are there any updates on your end that you're aware of?
No updates. I check in with Scott once in a while. You know, they're still plugging along, still working. They have a timeline set, not set in stone, but they have a timeline they're aiming for. To be clear, from what I understand from Scott, though, Lucifer the Father is a go. So they have secured enough funds at this point that it is happening, but they do request that people continue donating. And again, we're going to continue matching the donations because it's a pretty ambitious show, and they don't really have a limit on how much they want to do. So we know that it's happening to some degree. discovery, but they still need a lot of support to get it to where, obviously they want it to be. And if you watch the pilot, you'll see it really is a pretty heady idea. So they're going to make it work regardless what happens. But if we can keep helping them, we'd love to do that because they've been cool with us and we want to be cool back with them.
Exactly. Just like the same way the Cheem guys have been cool with us. We're all essentially small creators trying to make it in a big creator world, essentially, to obvious varying levels of success. Of course, Scott, Shaw, and Robert are definitely creating their series, and the Cheem guys are, going good. And of course, we're doing great.
I'm great.
I'm
great.
I got my paycheck. I got my paycheck last week, Friday. I'm doing great.
I'm feeling good. My back only hurts a little today. I'm good.
Well, you know what, Brian, speaking of small-time creators and people whose back hurt, I think it leads perfectly into our next pluggable as well. Of course, we believe in the innocence of Luigi Mangione, the lead suspect in the United Healthcare shooting. Now, of course, he's going to trial very soon. He's pled not guilty. But of course, Brian, you and I both agree, and we're not even being shit posters when we say this. He is absolutely innocent of all charges. No question.
He is. There is no way that you look at this and you look at the supposed evidence they have and the circumstances around his arrest and you say, this person is guilty beyond reasonable doubt. There is no way that anyone impartially looks at that and believes like this guy absolutely did it. We have evidence of it because you simply do not.
No, 100%. And we have definitely talked about it in previous episodes, but we want to be very clear here. There is so much judicial misconduct here that if this was a smaller time case in the media, this would have been thrown out. There is that much misconduct going on from both federal prosecutors and the Manhattan DA's department. This is laughably pathetic.
It's a fucking joke. This is a fucking performance trial. And yeah, they don't have a fucking leg to stand on. They're fucking around with his defense. They're not providing, all of the evidence for discovery because they don't have a fucking case and they know that, but they feel like they need to make a statement. They need to make a statement because God forbid working class people and just normal people show solidarity with someone who has been wrongly accused. God forbid that happen. So they can't let that happen. They need to prove to themselves and to us that he's guilty and do whatever they want to fucking do to him, whether it's fucking execute him or throw him away in a cell. That's why they're doing this. Not because they think he did it, because they can't have us showing solidarity for someone.
Exactly. The same way that they're going after pro-Palestine fucking protesters. The same way they're going after the fucking kneecap guys. They want to crush all dissent.
Yeah, it's not about what they supposedly did. It's about showing all of us that they can do this to us.
Exactly. So that's why we need to show Luigi all the solidarity we can get. Of course, Brian and I have both donated to the cause, and as well, of course, if you want to just once again send us an email, send us a YouTube comment, we will within reason match those donations as well, because we believe in Luigi's innocence. Not even not guilty, to be very clear. Innocence. And then speaking of, once again, small-time creators who are trying to make it in this world, of course, we plugged everybody else. So now let's plug our Patreon account. I almost said Spotify. We've already did that. Plug our Patreon account, where, of course, we have some great tiers. At the moment, we're plugging, I think, our most sensible tier, which is the $5 tier, which is you get every episode 48 hours early, because as I always say, the 48 hours are the most important. And unlike the time I was a suspect in a murder investigation, when those 48 hours passed, the police were like, time limits up, we're not even going to bother. But either way, though, yes, the first 48 hours are the most important. So feel free to, once again, donate to the Patreon page that we have. You're guaranteed 2 to 4 episodes a month. That's anywhere between $2.50 to $1.25 per episode. That's a fucking steal.
Yeah. We call them tears in heaven if you donate.
Exactly. Unlike that one song, was it Tears in the Rain? I can't remember who the fuck did that.
That's The Weeknd, is Tears in the Rain. I was talking about Tears in Heaven, the Eric Clapton song about his dead son.
I can't remember if it was Cumtown who said it, but it was Eric Clapton School for Window Safety.
That sounds like a C-Town bit.
Yeah.
Fuck that guy.
Yeah, fuck Eric Clapton, that racist asshole. I mean, I feel bad for his kid, obviously, but still, fuck Eric Clapton.
His kid hated him so much, hated his shitty music and his racist opinion so much that he dove out a fucking window.
Imagine being so racist that you start an entire music festival because you're that much of an asshole.
Yeah. This is so fucked up that they had to develop a whole movement against it. I was just reading about RAR today because I'm on kind of a Paul Weller, Billy Bragg kick. They talk a little bit about Bowie. Funny thing about that scene is, obviously that was inspired by both Bowie and Eric Clapton, but I feel like all the punk guys, they do go in harder on Clapton than Bowie. And I feel like secretly it's because they all grew up listening to Bowie's music, but they didn't give a fuck about Clapton.
I mean, let's be clear here. Like, if we're going to choose talent-wise, David Bowie was a million times better than Eric Clapton.
So I genuinely don't think that David Bowie was like being genuine. I think he was really unwell and kind of gacked out and saying some weird shit, but I don't, based on like how they've lived their lives in the decades since, Eric Clapton seems pretty right wing, whereas Bowie seems pretty sincere in his recanting of that. Seems like he was on some esoteric pseudo intellectual bullshit that can often lead to fascism, unfortunately, but seems like he backed away from that for real, as far as I can tell.
No, I totally agree. Like, yeah, going back to it, David Bowie was, yeah, gacked out and also extremely malnourished. Like, he was,
he was literally
late
living
stage anorexic level.
living off of bell peppers and milk and cocaine.
Yeah, that'll definitely lead to some psychosis, that is for sure. So I give David Bowie a lot of leeway. Like,
more than I would give Clapton, just because like it doesn't excuse it, but like Bowie did things throughout his life later on that seemed to, maybe it was for PR, I don't know, but he's been advocates against violence, by the police of non-white people. He was, not that it matters, but he was like married to Iman, whereas Eric Clapton has been pretty consistently low-key conservative and sometimes high-key conservative in the decades since.
No, and David Bowie was a big advocate of black artists playing on MTV. Like, he was a big reason why that was just going to happen.
All stuff like that, which, for his time is a pretty thoughtful criticism to make of MTV, which makes me think if he was like this hardline racist, he wouldn't have been thinking about that. I don't know. I don't know the guy.
Yeah, we don't know the guy either, but either way, David Bowie is not cringe in our book. Maybe cringe at that very moment, but definitely not cringe overall, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe for that one moment.
But, speaking of things that are very based, Brian, that ends our episode this week. And you know what? Before I go to bed, Brian, I want to say I was very charmed by this album, and I want to download all their songs on my bootleg Motorola Razr. And I'm going to go to sleep tonight listening to the music on my phone and sleeping with a fan, a real fan, not a fake fan. And as well, in the morning, I'm going to wake the fuck up with kinetic energy. And I don't even need the alarm. I'll wake up on instinct.
Oh my God.
I'm going to have unlimited energy when I drink my slushie. Okay, this is so bad. I'm trying so hard, but this is so bad.
This is getting out of control. No, yeah, exactly. WTFU would be a great alarm clock for real.
No, it really would, yeah.
The alarm clocks next to your bed and that comes out of it in the morning. Buster, you are up and raring.
Exactly. My life is a horror movie, and it's going faster by the day. Okay, I put in all the songs there. I did pretty good there in my usual plug.
Quit while you're ahead.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm very proud of you.
Thank you. All right. So have a good night, everybody. Once again, Cheem, thank you so much for answering all of our questions. We hope you'll get big, and I hope that we can be a part of that journey for you as well. So have a good night, everybody. Sleep tight, and maybe let Cheem bite. I don't know. I'll actually say let Cheem bite. Possibly.
We'll see how they feel about that.
Hell yeah. So have a good night, everybody.